I think I've been in environments that the losses were always louder than the wins. Those were always like way more talked about than any time anything positive would happen. So I think taking the time to reverse that and really truly celebrate the wins on the team and acknowledge the losses, right? Acknowledge the bad things, but flip the perspective on what takes priority in the day-to-days. I think could go like a long way.
Welcome to Future Works. This is a podcast dedicated to conversation around innovation when it comes to the workforce space. So we share research, inspiration, and a little bit of a glimpse into what we're building and what we're learning at Aspect. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and case studies and theories and what it takes to reinvent solutions when it comes to the workforce industry. My name is Michelle, and usually I am joined by my fantastic co-host, Gillian, who is currently enjoying maternity leave and wanted to wish her and her family the best, as we do all the things with newborns. As for the podcast, we will soldier on together as best we can with this candid conversation about what's happening in the world of work and how we can be a part of making all of that just a little bit better. Today, we're talking about imposter syndrome. And honestly, I hope whoever coined that term gets like royalties of some kind, because I'm pretty sure there is not like a blog or a podcast in the world that has not talked about it. How you feel, how to feel about feeling it and getting over it and fighting it and every kind of facet, I feel like, of imposter syndrome. So today, we're going to explore creating the environments that are hostile to that imposter syndrome feeling and what we can each do to kind of right size the view that we have of ourselves. I think today's guest, Gabe, is maybe the most famous person I know. He hosts his own podcast. He has killer questions about how work is working or not working with an incredibly diverse panel of guests who always have really interesting perspective on things that honestly otherwise are a little bit boring. Gabe is also on our team at Aspect and has been tasked with creating an incredible customer experience. But I think it's more than just his job. If you look at Gabe's LinkedIn, you'll immediately feel at home from the way that he highlights his guest expertise to quick tips on how you can make work from home work. Gabe makes it look easy to cultivate an online presence that is both welcoming and engaging. So it is so fun to get to chat with you kind of in this format and not just on Slack.
Oh my God, that was so nice. I've never been introduced so so warmly by anybody. I had to make my own, like, I'm doing one of our webinars soon, and they asked for a bio. And from now on, I'm just gonna like record. I'm gonna go back to this. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to take that. And anytime anybody asks me for a bio again, I'm just gonna plug that in and say, like, use this,
Yes.
please.
I love it. So one thing I did get from your LinkedIn is that you love Ted Lasso. So I want to know your very favorite thing about Ted Lasso, and you can only pick one.
Oh man.
High pressure question.
It's definitely his mustache, as you can tell by my face. But no, I think I did a video that I never released, but I turned it into a blog that I posted on LinkedIn about, his leadership and how we can lead like Ted Lasso and how he just makes everybody feel included. And I think that is the sign of a great leader is to, make everybody feel like part of the team. So just that and his optimism. Every time I watch Ted Lasso, I'm just like, oh, I wish I was that optimistic. And then I wake up the next day and I'm just as pessimistic as normal. So it's short lived, but I would say those are the two major takeaways. If I had to pick one, probably is optimism. I wish I could steal that.
I love it. I love that. For me, it was like the little pieces of like food that they interjected into the show.
Mhm.
Like I love that he had a peanut butter jar always open, just like taking like a disgusting like finger of peanut butter. And I love that he was making biscuits every day. Like
this is for the boss. It's the best.
yes, like that. Just like the nuance of how thoughtful that is, that like, I'm going to make these, they're going to be amazing, and I'm going to package them up like I purchased them. Like that's absurd. I love it.
And I think Ted Lasso, like to kind of come full circle to the topic, is like the exact opposite of imposter syndrome, where he could go and just completely change sports and not even miss a beat, right? And have just the utmost confidence in his background and the way he does things. So he's a good side note if you're good personal study if you're looking to study someone who is not affected by this at all.
I love it. Way to bring that back around too. You're like a true professional. So I would love for you, I know I kind of talked a little bit about who you are, but I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit more about anything that you feel is like, hey, you should know this about me, whether that's your work background or your personal background. Just give us kind of a sense of who you would like to tell people that you are.
So I have been over on the aspect team for a little over a year now. I work technically on the sales team. I'm in charge of like getting new prospects, seeing who's interested in learning more, etc., things like that. My background in total, I will start at like my low 20s. I own and operated a small little CrossFit studio when I was really young. That didn't go as I would like it to. It was doing fine, but I just learned very quickly that like business ownership at that age all by myself just wasn't for me. I was very stressed all the time. Maybe the founding part of all my imposter syndrome
All coming back. Yep,
is
we're full
from
circle.
there. From there, I bounced between like health and fitness and restaurants. I managed a few restaurants at Disney and things like that. And then I met some people who work in the, software sales is what we'll call it, that space. And they said, like, I think you'd be good at this. You should look into it. Like, let me know if you're ever interested. And then that ultimately led me to where I am now, just kind of failing upwards.
I mean, I feel like failing upwards takes like so much intentionality. Do you find that like the things that you learned both from like owning your own business and health and fitness, plus I love that you casually dropped that you owned restaurants, like you manage restaurants at Disney. Like, do you see parts of yourself now and like what you do day in and day out that you're like, oh, this happened at when I was managing a restaurant, or this happened when I was trying to run my own business?
To some degree, yeah. I think what I do really comes down to people skills, and I think I developed a lot of that from just all of those other things.
Yeah, I think that everyone should work in a restaurant. That's my
Couldn't agree more.
like I worked at Applebee's for my first like I moved across the country and like needed to make money and worked at Applebee's
Mhm.
and it was like I think I learned more about people and customer service and kind of the world in general from working there.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it being at Disney was I was fortunate enough to skip like the Applebee's part of restaurants. Like I went right to Disney World. Not that there's anything wrong with Applebee's, but like I'm sure you know what I mean.
No, there's a lot wrong with Applebee's. So
So like
they're not sponsoring
I was
us.
fortunate enough to like not really have to deal with, like really low tabs or anything like that. And I was also blessed to like be see a lot of different cultures and things like that and just see a lot of background. So that was really cool.
It's excellent. Okay, I feel like I could ask you a lot of questions about working at Disney, but we'll get to the topic at hand. Let's talk. Obviously, I think people know what imposter syndrome is, but I'd love to know kind of your working definition of imposter syndrome.
So the best definition I found and kind of the way that I feel the most is that you're constantly feared of being exposed as like a fraud.
Mhm.
That's I've seen it defined other ways, but that's how I feel almost all the time. Like even just when you were doing that intro, just like, oh, little they know how little work I'm doing, or they're gonna find out one day that I just have to hit a button and it edits everything for me or whatever. So it's just that's how it is for me personally. But and it's funny you mentioned something earlier about it being such a common like phrase that everybody knows. But if you really look into it and do the research, there's not a lot of content surrounding it compared to like other, psychological patterns that might be kind of in the same realm, like anxiety, depression, things like that. There's pretty little content out there to be had. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
Oh, I love that. Like you mean kind of on a psycholog from like a scientific perspective.
Like I found it. I've listened to a TED talk before, and then there's just it's all kind of the same rhetoric of what it is, but nobody really talks about like how to push through it or like what to do to like help with it because they usually tie it into anxiety or depression,
Hmm.
which is interesting because usually imposter syndrome is on the opposite end. Like anxiety and depression usually hits you when you're at like low points in your life or career, But I feel like imposter syndrome is the opposite when you're doing well, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's
it's
so interesting. I had not thought about it like that.
mhm.
I would for sure be in the group that's like, yeah, imposter syndrome probably kind of falls along the same lines. But yeah, that
So
totally
I'm
makes
sure
sense.
it's, on the same I'm sure they all play into each other, right? But it's just very interesting to me that it's really the only thing I can think of that like mentally affects us when things are going well.
Hmm. Ooh, okay. I think that is so interesting. So I want to ask, in kind of that vein, when is the first time that you remember experiencing imposter syndrome?
I looking back at it now and I wouldn't have identified it then, but growing up when I was playing sports, I would recognize very early on that whenever I would do something well, I would immediately humble. I guess is what they would see it there, or how my parents would, describe it to the other parents. It's like, oh, he's so humble. But looking back at it, I was just like, no, I really believed that. I would make an excuse like, oh, the pitcher, messed up that pitch. So I was lucky enough that I was just right place, right time. Just
Mm.
I got lucky. I would make up a lot of those reasonings. And for me, I think maybe that came from I was a really chunky kid. Like there's this photo that goes around of me playing t-ball that I like show all my friends, and I was just like massive. And then one summer, it was like sixth or seventh grade. I just all we did all summer was play basketball, and I lost like so much weight, and then all that athleticism I didn't know I had finally like appeared. And so I think a lot of that was just going from, being the, chunky kid to all of a sudden being good at something. Just I never got over the chunky kid part of my
Oh,
brain.
that's so interesting.
So that's where I
Okay.
think it came from then, and then it just carried over into everything. Like I was the class president my senior year, and I was just like, oh, they just didn't they just did it because they didn't want the same person to do it 2 years in a row because the person I beat was the junior class
The
president or
incumbent. You
whatever.
beat the incumbent.
I did. So it's just always an excuse, and like yeah, maybe that comes across as humble, but realistically, like I never thought I deserved any of it. Like I never thought I was doing well. It was always just somebody else messed up. It wasn't me succeeding.
Okay, but now I wanna know, like, do you well, we're gonna get into this, so I'm trying not to bear it's, to, like, get to the lead too fast here, but do you feel like now you get to enjoy some of those successes more?
Absolutely not. It's still there. But the difference now is at least I think the main thing you can do to even, like, address this and maybe get past it is just to know you have it and know it exists so that you can kind of, like, "I'm feeling this. It's my imposter syndrome. I am doing well. I just need to, like, think about it and, like, rationalize my feelings and thoughts and understand where they're coming from." But no, they're still every one-on-one I have with my leader, it's always just like, "Thanks, but I really just got lucky. I utilized this," or whatever,
Hmm.
failing upwards.
So, do you think that I so appreciate that you gave your background a bit there. Do you think that everyone has imposter syndrome at some point? Or do you feel like, those who really experience imposter syndrome all the time, like you're talking about, sort of have something in their past that sort of led them to that feeling?
I think most people do. I will say that there are people out there that are just very confident in themselves, and I don't think those people have it. Must be nice. Could never be me. But they are. I know people in my life that I don't think have ever experienced it, or like I know for sure because they've asked me about it. Like I have no idea what you're feeling. Like, can you help explain it to me? And they just like no idea when I tell them this is what imposter syndrome is. So I think if you're one of those like self-confident people, you probably don't experience it. But I would say 90% of the world does. I don't know the exact statistics. I think it's pretty alarming. It's way more common in minorities and than it is in others though. And that's just from probably years of generations of people telling their kids like you're gonna have to work harder, XYZ because of whatever factors. So for whatever reason it's more common in people of color or people in the LGBTQ community. It's just a sad fact of life.
Yeah, super interesting. It's interesting as you were talking about your background, I was doing the thing you're not supposed to do and thinking about me, thinking about myself. But it was interesting. I feel like as I was growing up, I was overconfident in my abilities, and I remember once I was like I'll say I was a medium-sized fish. I was I was a medium-sized fish in a very, very, very small pond, like a puddle. I was like just a regular-sized fish in a puddle. So in my brain, it was very big as a child. But then when I went to college, which was also not a big college, so it was just like a regular sized pond, I realized like, oh no, like I'm very small fish. And I think I wonder if because I grew up thinking I was like hot stuff and then, didn't realize that I wasn't until I was way older than I should have been. Like that experience for me in imposter syndrome manifests itself more in like, well, like I'll help other people succeed. Like I feel like that's kind of my management tactic.
Mm, good at delegating and
Yes,
helping other people.
exactly.
No, that makes sense. I kind of had a similar. I think that plays a part of it for me too. Is I was an athlete, but I was at a really small school too. So I've always said to other people as I got older, like I played football or whatever, but my school only had like 100 kids in our class. So like if I went to a bigger school, I probably wouldn't have played. Like another humble, humble imposter syndrome excuse that I use. So it's funny that you brought up the medium fish in the in the small pond because I relate to that
Yeah.
too.
Um, so because you're well versed in feeling this imposter syndrome feeling, tell me about like what signs are there that like this is imposter syndrome? Like what goes off in your brain now that alerts you like, hey, like this is just imposter syndrome versus maybe like that like my like college experience, which was like, whoa, 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 you're thinking way too highly of yourself. Like maybe talk about what are the signs it's imposter syndrome and are there differences in also like maybe you should get humbled.
Mhm. So I think really imposter syndrome, like the only really way to know what's happening is if everybody else around you is telling you that you're doing well, right?
Mm,
Because if you're suffering from it, you don't think you're doing well, but trust the people around you that they're not gonna lie to you, and that
mm.
is dependent on who you surround yourself with and the job you choose to keep and the partners that you choose to have. As far as the humbling yourself one, it's the same thing. If people aren't validating those feelings that you're having, maybe that's how you know that maybe you need more imposter syndrome.
Let me give you a dose of imposter.
So I think just really just listening to the people around you and how they speak of you or what they're telling you is the only real way to navigate both.
Yeah. Who do you find are like, who have you identified are the best people in your life to kind of pay attention to?
My fiance is very good at like helping me realize that I'm like being too negative about myself. And I've, as far as, because I think the biggest signs of imposter syndrome are in the workspace. I think that's when most people experience it. The way that I personally like try to navigate that is I'm constantly asking for feedback, whether it's negative, positive, or whatever, so that I don't have like just my internalized feelings of what I'm doing wrong. Like I want
Mm.
to be told from my superiors or whoever, this is what you're doing well, this is what you're doing wrong, everything's great, keep it up, whatever. Hearing that my love language is it's words of affirmation. Like I'm really big in love languages, and I think anybody who has imposter syndrome, it's probably words of affirmation. Like please tell me I'm pretty over and over again. Um, so just constantly asking, for feedback, even though it might be annoying, to the leader, possibly. I think that that's the only way that I really could navigate without the like internalizing it over and over and over again, and then having just a bomb of emotions come out where they have to talk me off a ledge, which I've done before too.
Do you feel like if you find that your leader is just giving you like, yeah, this is great, you're doing great, do you find that you discount that? Like your imposter syndrome like discounts the positive feedback? And if so, then what do you do to sort of counteract that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think a lot of times this is gonna sound like a brag, and I don't want it to, but like I almost
That's your
only
imposter syndrome.
I know I seldom get negative feedback, but I think because of my imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of people who work remote have it too.
Mm.
Where I don't know if this happened to anybody else. Like I don't know if you experienced this. The moment I started working remote, I feel like I started working like so much harder because I needed to prove that like I was doing my job. And so like because of that, I think most of the feedback I get generally is positive. And it's funny you said that because like I would love negative feedback. I think that would help me realize, like, that would help me understand that it is real feedback and they're not just like, telling me what I want to hear and secretly talking about me behind my back. So if my boss is hearing this, like, nitpick, like, give me some negative feedback, please. I would love it. 'Cause I've never, until you said that out loud, like, I just thought about it and I was like, I think actually I would love that. Please tell me something I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a common thing though, because as you right, like as people kind of rise through the ranks and become people managers, I think that we all feel like it's hard to give negative feedback. Like, I don't want to tell somebody they're doing a bad job if they're doing a good job in all of these other areas. So I do feel like probably a whole episode could be spent on like how do we give each other that sort of constructive feedback that's going to like let you know like, hey, when I say something positive, I mean it, and when I say, hey, here's something you can work on, I mean that just as much. Like,
Yeah, right.
I mean both things in equal amounts.
In any relationship, giving negative feedback is challenging, but it does validate the good ones more. Like, I think I watch videos and just consume so much content on like body language and how we talk to people and things like that. And just like when you're dating somebody or you have a parent relationship where like the feedback is almost all negative, and then they finally do something positive, that feeling is just like amplified to like 1,000, as opposed to the opposite end. If you're always saying I'm proud of you and things like that. Like, it just doesn't, mentally, it doesn't hit as hard than the people who don't say it as much, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate, but it is what it is. I totally understand.
Yeah, there's got to be a balance somewhere. I've been trying to think about like times that I have received negative feedback. Like I think the best example is I was on this call as I was starting a new job, and we're on this team call and everyone is like talking and like kind of throwing out like, hey, I think this is the direction we should go. And someone said, like, I wholeheartedly disagree with you. And here's my thought process around it. How, and then like as a team, we sort of worked through how do we take both of these things that are true and make them make sense together. And I think there, like that for me, there was so much power in that statement about like, I wholeheartedly disagree with you and I'm going to keep working on this. We're going to keep working on this together to make it a positive outcome.
If somebody said that to me on a Teams call, I think I would immediately have a panic attack. Like, if they just started with "I wholeheartedly disagree with you," but I'm happy that it ended positively for you.
Yeah, that's probably just like says more about me.
Because I'm
Maybe.
always like, whenever I am in a group call, like, I'm always thinking like, okay, I need to say something, right? Like, I can't be the person on the call that doesn't say anything, and then to speak up and then have somebody immediately shut me down, it sounds like awful.
Yeah. Okay, so so what would be, like let's say you are a people manager and you kind of you I feel like we all sort of know each other and we are aware of this concept of imposter syndrome. So let's say you have like a really high performer on your team. Like let's say we have you on our team. What would be a way where someone could say, "Hey, here's some feedback. Like, here's something that I really need you to work on that would not like totally destroy you."
That's a good question because I am really sensitive. I think this, as dumb as it sounds, I think the compliment sandwich really works well. And ending, I do content on my own TikTok that is just like kind of like thought leadership, sales, body language, etc. And ending on a positive, people only remember really the last thing ever said in an interaction. So I think just ending on a positive is always like the best way to go. And something else that I think is worth mentioning, I've been in environments where compliments and negative parts were just addressed to the group instead of the individual, right? So like
Yeah.
the team did really well. I personally think shouting those people out individually on both, positive and negatives, like the negatives can happen on one-on-ones instead of like there's memes and stuff where like, oh, this meeting was about so and so, right? This person did this, so we're having a meeting about it. Like, don't have the meeting about it, just address so and so and let them
Yeah.
like have
Yeah.
that so that nobody's thinking in the back of their head like, "Was this about me?" Because I'm that person. Like, what this about me is always is always in the back of my head. So I think, have those victories individually, have those negative comments individually, and then just try to end on a positive as possible, because I think that's what people remember the most, is whatever you said last.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Like, the meeting is about this person. I've totally been a part of those. And I do think like imposter syndrome tends to be loud in those meetings where it's like, this is about me. I've got to
Hmm.
change, you know, like we just got an email. I've got 3 kids. We got an email from the school that was like, hey, your child cannot come into the classroom early because it's disruptive for like teachers and their like in their planning time. And I'm like talking to my kid, like, hey, is this you? Like,
Uh-huh.
we're doing a bad job as parents because you're going into school early. I was like, hey, do you stay outside until, you know, you're supposed to go in when the bell rings? And she just like outed the kid that it was. She's like, oh, that's about this kid. I was like, oh, okay. She has no
Mm.
imposter syndrome. You know, she's 7.
It's when it starts.
She's just like a self-confident kid. She's just like, yeah, I got that. That's not me.
And I think this is to piggyback off of what you were asking me earlier. I thought of something else, is to, and I think this can only be applicable if you're fortunate enough to have a small team. But just asking people how they like to receive feedback, I think can just be
Mm,
the easiest thing in the world, and nobody ever does it. I feel like I've never been asked that question in my life, but I feel like if, somebody did ask me, and be like, hey, I just like direct feedback. Like, I don't want it to be like, hey, we've noticed this happening at the team. Like, please just let me know if it was me. Like, if Gabe, we noticed this happen. Like, can you like change it this way, or in the future do it like this? Like, just tell me exactly what it is and be as blunt as possible, and then tell me I'm pretty afterwards. Like.
yes. I love it. I mean, and I think that knowing yourself, like, because we don't typically ask that question, the skill set to know, like, hey, this will really work with me, like, that is huge. Like, that's a huge thing that you kind of bring to the table. Like, hey, I know this about myself. Here's how I need to, if you've got something that you want me to work on, here's the best way for me to hear it.
Also, just tell me right away. Just like, hey, we,
Yeah,
we need to
yes.
chat
Please don't wait.
at 3:30 later today. Like, no. If you tell me we need to chat like later today, I'm not doing anything all day except for stressing about that
Yeah.
meeting. So just call me. Put me in a huddle, teams me immediately. Like, I'd much rather that. And I think most people probably would too. So
Yes.
we need to
I
talk text.
hate
No, thank you.
I hate there's like for sure been times where like I schedule meetings like that, right? So I'll have gotten a directive like, hey, schedule a meeting with this person tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that to them.
Mm, yeah.
That's gonna ruin their day and their morning.
Or if it has to be tomorrow, just send us a quick Slack. Here's what we're gonna go over, just so you're
Yeah.
prepared. Just let me prepare somehow.
Yeah. So I do we've kind of like been dancing around this, but I want to be direct on like thinking as a manager, how can managers and leaders contribute to an environment that discourages this feeling of imposter syndrome?
I think I've been in environments that the losses were always louder than the wins.
Hmm.
Like, those were always like way more talked about, or discussed, or whatever it may be, than anytime anything positive would happen. So I think taking the time to reverse that, and really truly celebrate the wins on the team, and acknowledge the losses, right? Acknowledge the bad things, but flip the perspective on what takes priority in the day-to-days, I think could go like a long way. Like, my last employer was awful at that. Like, when things were going well, we knew that because nobody in leadership was talking about us or talking to us at all, right?
Hmm.
And that's the issue. When I used to work in the gym space, when I used to train like my coaches, I used to tell them, like, because it was classes, right? So there was like 20 people in a class, and I used to tell them that you don't want people to think that anytime you come up to them, it's to make a correction, right? That
Hmm.
shouldn't be
Yeah.
their thought when you're coming up to them. Our main job, really, in our space, I thought personally, was to make sure everybody's safe and make sure everybody's having a good time, because most people hate going to the gym. Have a conversation with them. Like, that should be 90% of what you do. It shouldn't always be like, oh, coach is coming to talk to me. Let me fix my posture. Like, what am I doing wrong? They should think that you're coming to, can I cuss?
Oh yeah.
Shoot the shit, right? Like, that's what
Yeah.
they think you should
Yeah.
be coming to.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Gabe's coming. Like, we're going to chat. And I think it's the same way. Like, if my boss pings me, I shouldn't immediately be like, what am I doing wrong?
I love that so much because I hate when like Like my hairdresser is my friend, right? And so but I'll like forget to have texted her until it's like my next time that I like need a haircut. And I'm like, oh man, like, hey, I just want to catch up with you. And also, can you have an appointment for me?
Yeah, I've done that. I'm guilty of that too.
But for, like, like on a work level, like what a terrible feeling to be like the only time my manager ever talks to me is because like something is going wrong, like, or they need something or whatever. Like, I love kind of that intentionality. Like, hey, let's just like have a conversation and, like, let's talk about these other things. Uh, and it's not always like, yeah, this is the one conversation I have.
Mhm. I couldn't agree more. I think that's the biggest takeaway I can have for leaders is have more than negative conversations. Don't cancel one-on-ones because there's nothing to talk about. Like, it's okay if your one-on-one is, just it's 10 minutes shorter than normal, but it's just you guys just catching up about whatever new projects you're working on, or you end up just shooting the shit for a couple of minutes. If you're only having those one-on-ones when there's something like important to talk about, I think that'll foster a big environment of people who suffer from imposter syndrome to just like have it at 11.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's like such great. Like, don't cancel your one-on-ones. Just like keep them. I love that. So, on the team, you've talked about like you aren't a people manager currently. How do you feel like as an individual contributor, as a doer, that you can contribute to creating kind of this like safe, non-imposter syndrome environment?
Hmm.
Or do you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever really thought about it on that end because ever since I stopped entrepreneurship, I just had been like so happy just staying in my lane. And just like not being in charge of anybody. Um, so I think what I do subconsciously without even realizing it is try to be proactive in how I choose to help people. So at this point right now, I am one of the senior people on the team. And so like realizing the things that like I didn't have that I wish I had, like the guidance that I, wish I would have been trained differently or wish I knew this, beforehand, try to supply those things and like validate the team around me as, quote unquote, the senior, and not leaving that totally on to my superior. And just, it's really hard to be super available when the whole company's remote, like everybody's in different time zones and things, but just being as available as possible. And if I see something before my leader does, like shouting them out in Slack or doing that just as a team member, I think almost holds more weight when a team member does it as opposed to a superior.
Yeah. Like, hey, I noticed you. You're doing such good work. Um and I feel like on a manager level it feels like, well, they have to say that.
Mhm.
But when it comes from your teammate, that's like, oh, that person went out of their way to like make sure I knew. Like
Yeah.
that's
It's like when
huge.
someone knew it outside of your parents. And looking back at it, when I started doing the videos that I do on LinkedIn, a lot of people I'd asked who weren't in my department at all were just slacking me and asking me more about it. Like Gillian was one of those people. That's how I think we got here.
Yeah.
And it was just like that made me feel so good about myself. And like I don't think I suffered from any imposter syndrome then because people outside of my team were telling me it.
That's huge. I mean, that to me says that, what you're saying about like going out of your way to appreciate your teammates, or not just your teammates, but just like other people in your company, like taking genuine interest. We've talked about that in the podcast before. Like taking genuine interest in the people around you has this like outsized importance in someone's life because like you've talked about feeling imposter syndrome on every level except kind of that one time.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only time I can really pinpoint is when I actually believed what people were telling me, like the positive things, is when it came from people who I wouldn't expect.
Hmm. That's really good. And I love kind of that encouragement. Like, hey, like take a look around and like be that sort of encouragement.
Be the change, right?
Yeah, yes, yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. We'll just like, sell that at Hobby Lobby.
I actually saw a kind of a video. I don't know if it was recent or what of Barack Obama, and he was talking about everybody's intimidated when they get in the room, but then you realize like nobody knows what they're doing. Like
Yeah.
everybody is kind of just feeling the same way as you, and so like I saw that like maybe 2 weeks ago, like when we first decided on this topic, and I was like, oh, Obama said it. I'm gonna have to remember that for the
Yes.
podcast.
Check, check. Yeah, I do feel like that I was listening to another podcast and just someone saying out loud, like the CEO, like the person that you admire, they are also a person. Like just kind of keeping that at the forefront. Like we all have this shared human experience. And like, you can obviously have respect, but there's no need to have intimidation.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
So let's take this to like super actionable for everyone listening. So, as a doer, as someone like yourself, like how can we implement some of these things? Like, what would you say that someone should take away from this conversation? Like, hey, go do this as soon as you stop listening.
Yeah. I think one of the things I do the most, and I touched on it already a little bit, is just proactively ask for feedback. Like, don't wait for it because you're going to just fester and have all these negative thoughts, especially if you work remote where like maybe you only see or talk to your boss or superior once biweekly, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty common. So just when you do have those conversations, being intentional about like making sure that you are validating your feelings and asking like, is there anything I could be doing better? Like, do you have any feedback from outside of the team that they're telling you about what I'm doing or anything like that? Just proactively asking for that feedback and just kind of just take a little bit of time to educate on what imposter syndrome is because there's different ways to feel it. Mine is that like I'm a fraud, right? There's other ways that people
Mm.
experience it, but mine is might be different than the way Michelle feels it or whoever feels it. I mean, Michelle doesn't because she's big fish in in the small pond, but you know what I mean. Just kind of do some research. There's a lot of content out there on what it is, and then you can kind of figure out what you need to do to make it feel better, and just have conversations with the people you feel closest to, like your partner, if they know that better about you. I think Brooke, my fiance, like does a really good job of validating me like almost every day, so that I don't
Mm.
I don't struggle with that kind of stuff because that's just what I need in my love life is just content validation.
I love that. So what about we've kind of talked around this, but let's kind of like give the TLDR of like as a manager, as a people manager, what can managers do, as soon as they finish listening here?
Same. I think that's another thing just to kind of get educated on. And we brought this up earlier, but I think it really goes a long way to just ask people how they want to be led. Like, how can I,
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you feel like you get your best work done? Like, how can I help
Yeah.
foster that environment for you? If I do have to give feedback, like, how would you like to hear that? Do you want it written out? Do you want it, word? Do you want to talk about it in person? Like, how would you prefer that? And I think just hearing that from them will eliminate their excuse of like, oh, my boss just doesn't
Yeah.
eliminate
Yeah.
that excuse out of their zeitgeist or whatever verb I'm trying to think of. And it'll just kind of help make you more intentional about your leadership and make you one look better to them because like, oh, they care about me. And to
Yeah.
make those conversations a little easier to have because you're doing it the way that they want to have them.
Yeah. I do think something that you do well and like something going back to kind of as anybody who is being led, like everybody has a manager pretty much, right? Like you all report up to someone. I think like for each of us to sort of take that as something we can do as well, like know yourself, like think about what manager has given me great feedback and what did I like about that so that then you can speak up for yourself and advocate like, hey, like, I really want to hear X, Y, and Z. Here's the best way for me to hear that. And, like if we communicate that way together, like everything's going to go so much better.
Yeah, I agree.
So if someone has 5 minutes to sort of work on their imposter syndrome self, what would be your recommendation in like if they don't have a lot of time?
I'm one of those people that will like look in the mirror and tell myself like you're gonna have a good day, like
Oh, I
that
love
kind
that.
that kind of stuff. So like I would do that. I have a 6 year old. We end our day every night with going around and telling everybody what the best part of the day was, so that we always take something positive out of the day. 10 out of 10, definitely recommend that. He usually rambles and tries to like prolong bedtime, but we what did we do today? I need a reminder. And then we have to like recap the whole day for him. But just kind of goes back to just opening and ending the day, bookending the day on positives is the way I would try to do it.
Oh, that's amazing. We do that around the dinner table with my little crew. And it's the same thing actually where they're just trying to not eat.
Mhm, exactly. which I never
That's their
understood
main.
because like I love to eat. So
Yeah. And I'm
I don't
like,
understand that part of childhood.
me neither. I for sure have been like, you know that I used to enjoy meals and now we just have to convince you to eat meals. Anyway, all on a side, but kind of that same vein where it's like, hey, let's like notice when like we need like when things have been going well and like talk about it out loud.
Yeah. And one, I think because of how much I've acknowledged imposter syndrome in my own life, I think we overcompensate by telling like our 6 year old how well he's doing. And so we're probably creating like a little egotistical monster. But there is, he was in swim lessons last year and it just makes me cry for some reason. So if I cry, I'm sorry. And
No need to be sorry.
he was like really struggling with like they were trying to learn how to like swim to the bottom of the pool, and the teacher would get them a little push so that they can like learn how to swim down underwater. And he did it for the first time, and we're in the bathroom, he was changing and he was just butt naked in the bathroom getting his clothes on. He said, you know, I'm really proud of myself. And just the emotional intelligence of a 6 year old to say he was proud of himself was just like, I was like, I'm doing something right. Like I'm erasing imposter syndrome from his life. It was just so amazing.
That is beautiful. And I can't think of a better way for us to kind of close this conversation than let's work on it in ourselves and let's help the people around us just as much to kind of get to the bottom and feel that pride in
Yeah.
themselves.
I think something I didn't even realize was the main takeaway that I think I really enjoyed was just don't be afraid to give out compliments to other people and just create that environment in your team or just in your company. And I think it'll all just come full circle where people are just doing it to everybody, hopefully. So just if you're somebody who struggles with that, maybe try to be the leader in getting that going. Like reach out to somebody who's maybe not on your team, but you saw something on LinkedIn that they liked. Like, oh, I really like that post. Like, how did you think of it? Just take an interest in what they're doing and be complimentary. And I think just creating that space can help you yourself too.
I love that. Gabe, this has been so incredible. And I so appreciate your candidness and thoughtfulness in the episode. I hope we get to keep having more conversations like this. I'm so glad that you're part of our team at Aspect. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Future Works. You can click subscribe and follow along for more conversations like this one.